So BRICS has come to a close today. Today was day 3
Oh,
of BRICS. It started on Tuesday. I was supposed to cover the whole thing, but I got sick. I think it's COVID. But we can talk about that later. Um, BRICS is obviously, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Literally, those are the initials of the countries, the 5 countries that are involved. It's supposed to be an alliance to strengthen economic partnerships, cooperation. And the focus of the summit was to bring everything into Africa, a country that is very resource rich, but has been plagued by a lot of exploitation from the West. And we saw this sentiment echoed in the recent Russia Africa summit in St. Petersburg just a few weeks ago. And so BRICS was, I've never seen this level of attention paid to BRICS at all by anybody ever. Our friends who are, anti imperialist and always look at these blocks like CELAC, BRICS, CIS, and all of these SEO, all of these different organizations have been paying attention to this for a long time, but I have never seen this level of attention paid to BRICS. People have been dying to go to BRICS now, and actually started to understand what really the alliance is about. And so this is the 15th annual BRICS summit, and it was decided it would be in Johannesburg. And as you all know, there was ICC issued arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. The ICC is obviously the International Criminal Court, and they are South Africa is a part of the ICC. So, because of that, there were sectors in the South African government that said they would issue an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin if he came to Johannesburg, even though President Cyril Ramaphosa said he wouldn't do it. Putin decided, I'm not going to go. Let's just send Sergei Lavrov. Of course, that didn't mean Putin wouldn't participate. He's participated via video call conference every single day of the summit. And Sergei Lavrov was in attendance, just specifically as a representative of Russia. So you had all of these people come, all of these representatives, including the UN chief Antonio Guterres, who said some things today as well. And he was probably one of the least liked people that was there. So let's go ahead and start with the first one. I'm briefly just going to go over what happened and some of the things Putin said. So let me see if I can go here. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. So we are here day 1, and day 1 was marked by talks of the de-dollarization and the formation of this national currency under the BRICS New Development Bank, and also a focus on bilateral trade and industrialization in Africa, which is the area where they want to focus on. And then the day ended with them having their private meeting in this place called Summer Place in Hyde Park, where they were discussing whether to allow new members in or not. And that was basically day 1. And there were several speeches. One of the ones I highlighted was Vladimir Putin's speech, where he did blame. Just go back up to the top, and I'll just like quickly not go through everything, but I'll just say Putin blamed the rise of the entire cost of grain and of food to the sanctions on Russia by the West. He said they were adding to the fuel crisis and affecting the norms of global trade, and then thereby affecting the poorest nations, because it would just make the process of the transaction and logistics a lot harder because Russia was sanctioned. So he really highlighted on that, if you can scroll down a little bit. And another thing he talked about was that they want to expand on trade, and everything that they're talking about is going to be based on, equality, mutual interests, and that the mutual investment by BRICS member states has grown 6 times in the last decade. Investments in the total economy by BRICS members has increased twofold, and Russia's trade turnover with BRICS partners has increased by 40.5% and is now at a record high. And over the last 6 months of this year, in comparison to 2022, it grew by 35.6%. And they're gonna they mentioned the de-dollarization, but then they talked more about that in the last couple days. And then BRICS is going to become more powerful than the G7. It already is now that we know what we know. And he did talk about this really important thing that there's going to be new trade hubs built, and Russia wants to really focus on including the Northern Sea Route and the North-South Transport Corridor that would pass through the Arctic Ocean and also along Russia's northern coastline to ensure that there's more of a faster delivery between Europe and the Far East. And then the second route would connect Russia's northern and Baltic points to the Persian Gulf, meaning like, the Middle East area and the Indian Ocean. So that would mean the Eurasian countries and the African countries. So those are twofold routes, if you can imagine it on a map, right? One towards Europe and Asia, and the other one towards from Asia to Africa. And that's all coming from Russia, because Russia's like right in, in the smack middle. And that's going to be huge if they can do that. By the way, you guys don't know this, but there was approval. Putin is going to build a train from St. Petersburg to Moscow that's only 2 hours. And they are also working on a train from Moscow to Belarus, which would be, and it's been approved, which will be absolutely just amazing. So the fact that they're going to do this isn't surprising at all, because this is what they do here and in China. So he also mentioned, of course, that 70% of the grain that went through this corridor with the Black Sea Grain Initiative went to the richest countries, and the poorest countries were left out. And Russia's willing to go back on the deal if their conditions are met. So there is a video if you want to watch it. It's really long. It's 14 minutes, and that's being cut a little bit. And so you can watch it, but basically says what I just said. So we're not going to watch that because it's 14 minutes long. So so that was day one of the summit.
Yeah. So basically, fam, that this whole kind of thing, I'm very interested to see what's going on with Argentina, because I heard Argentina put an application in and they're going to be accepted. At one point, I heard they were kind of shunned off and they weren't going to be involved because the West was pressuring them with the IMF and monetary loans and stuff. But this is like opening the door to de-dollarization, getting away from the West, the unipolar world to the multipolar world. What I noticed with some of the new countries who are joining BRICS, they're going to be involved with both NATO, I don't want to say NATO, EU ties as well as BRICS ties. In other words, they're not going to just be one or the other. They're going to be able to deal with both. Is that correct? So it's not like a one-all, be-all. It's not like you pick this one or that one. India seems that they're going to be involved with both currencies. China still seems like they'll be involved with, even Russia will be involved with both currencies. However, this is another way where they don't have to simply live by the United States and the West rules.
Yeah, no, like BRICS is not about telling other countries what to do. That's something that they've highlighted time and time again. It's about respecting the sovereignty of each country and having a some members want an anti-West bloc, want it to be an anti-West bloc, but others don't. Lula does not want that. Lula wants it to be more focused on what they're doing and de-dollarization and national sovereignty, but others have a more anti-Western sentiment, mainly probably from Africa for obvious reasons. And members like Cuba, not members, people who are going to strive to be members like Cuba. Miguel Diaz-Canel spoke today, and I'll briefly talk about that in a second.
That's awesome.
But awesome. It's definitely not. It's definitely not an anti-West alliance, but in a way, it is perceived as that.
It's like an
alternative. It's a completely different type. It's going to be based on a different type of relationship, based on more of an equitable partnership versus a dictatorial unipolar type of partnership. So day 2 was basically I summarized it briefly. It was marked by this commitment to expansion and non-dollar trade investment, and more talk of new transportation systems and focusing on science, tech, and space. Basically, a lot of these countries that are part of BRICS are in the global south, right? And so the global south has continuously been undermined and hasn't really had a foot in the door. And specifically, South Africa, representing the continent of Africa, is really the reality of that. India obviously is comes from poverty. It's grown in its development and industrialization, and China is now where it's at, but it didn't start off there. So you have these sort of emerging economies that are a part of BRICS, and you can say the same thing about Russia, where Russia was in the 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union to where it is now. So you have almost like these underdogs that have come up, and Brazil, obviously a powerful economy in Latin America, but again, still in the global South. These countries represent the global South. They don't represent the West. And so that's why it's such a big deal for them to have their own area where they can focus on what's beneficial to them in the global South, in the Far East, and, in areas that have been completely ignored by those who have a seat at the table in the beautiful garden and have been thought of as just being in the jungle. So Putin also made a speech that time. And he said some powerful things here that I do want to point out. He said, we oppose hegemonies of any kind and the exceptional status that some countries aspire to, as well as the new policy it entails, a policy of continued neocolonialism. He is speaking, this is why a lot of Africans who went to the Russia-Africa summit love Putin and have this relationship, this affinity for Russia, because of words like this and the understanding going back to the Soviet era in the fight against apartheid and the fact against the colonization of many African countries. He said attempts by some countries to preserve their global hegemony paved the way for the deep crisis in Ukraine when an anti-constitutional government coup took place in the country with the help of the West, followed by a war against those who refused to accept the coup, a cruel war of extermination which lasted 8 years. Russia decided to side with the people who are fighting for their culture, their traditions, language, and future, stopping the war unleashed by the West and its satellites in Ukraine against the people of Donbass is the only thing that defines our actions in Ukraine. So he said this because obviously the entire bloc basically has said we're going to remain neutral. South Africa has said that. Lula has said that. India has said that. And China has they've been trying to devise a plan for peace, right? And so they're all like, yeah, we want to devise a plan for peace. We want this to be resolved in a resolution in a peaceful way. So Putin also said, well, I thank, the members for trying to find an end to the conflict by peaceful means, because all of these leaders that you could say all of them, especially Lula, Putin, they're extremely big on following the UN Charter. This was mentioned many times, and they're extremely big on diplomacy. And even though they do want to follow the UN Charter, they recognize that the UN Charter needs to be reformed. So they talked about that as well. They talk about creating transport between Africa and Russia, talked about why there aren't direct flights from Brazil to South Africa to Johannesburg, that needs to happen. So they were talking about that, and there's going to be more events happening next year. The BRICS summit will be in October. We don't know the exact date yet, but it will be in Kazan, a city in Russia. And they hope that that the bloc will work together on foreign policy issues, meaning kind of like, NATO has their whole agenda, that they'll be able to work more. Now, as Pasta mentioned, some people are going to have connections to the West. So we'll see how that works out when that works out. He also mentioned a priority in fighting terrorist ideology. Russia is in Syria right now, helping to fight the literal radicals that the U.S. backed and continues to back. So that is also a part of that. And yeah, I mean, they definitely talked about the financial system, but
which country is the most surprising to me of this, fam, of the joining here? Really, to tell you the truth, it's Egypt. You know what I'm saying? Egypt seems to have this kind of loyalty to the West. They get a lot of weapons from the West. I can understand where the West would say, hey, man, Saudi Arabia, I guess, that ship has sailed. We screwed that up. You have a GDP in the trillions. We understand that you have to go and do this because you have to be able to trade in other currencies, especially with Russia and China. You've made that decision. UAE, okay, I gotcha. But for me, the most surprising is Sisi in Egypt. You know what I'm saying? For them to be permitted, or something not to become of whatever's to become of Egypt. I don't know, because Egypt's kind of in that weird space where, they always seem to be pro-West loyal, and it seems like the West has always backed that regime, that military regime. But for them to go off and do that, that was the one that was most surprising to me, fam.
Yeah, and let's go to day 3. And I'll just say real quick about Egypt. Egypt is a country that is visited by Russians. Russians don't need a visa. They don't have a problem to a lot of people are going to vacation to Egypt right now. There's a lot of tourism. That's Russian tourism in Egypt. Egypt is in Africa, but it's also close to the Middle East. It's close to, Russia. It's close to Asia in some aspects. And so it is pretty central, and it's beneficial to them to maintain this central economic ability relationships with everybody, because it's just works for them. And if they shun Russia, they would stand to lose a lot, because they do have a lot of business dealings with Russia as a country, just like Turkey does. And not just in tourism, but in other sectors as well. And again, I think what we're seeing here is other countries start seeing where the ship is sailing to, where the wind is blowing, and they're starting to really take precautions to, okay, well, if this is where things are going, we're going to get ahead of the game. Yeah. And I think that's why Egypt is one of these countries, and they are fairly stable in terms of, where they're at right now. I want to go to Egypt. I think that's one of the next places I will go to. But it's definitely not a country that's free of Western influence. Yeah. But it's also not fully a Western country. So I think it has that sort of Turkish dynamic where you can see the multiple aspects of that. So,
by the way, fam, can you answer that question on the screen? Because somebody's asking, a libertarian socialist who left a $2 super, whatever you call it, Rumble rant over on Rumble. He says, he or she says, if the BRICS is the future, do you recommend relocating to Brazil or another BRICS country, fam?
It depends, it depends on what you're looking for work and what you are used to. Brazil is it's going to be better than where it was, right? I mean, with Bolsonaro, Brazil was not a part of BRICS. They were, but they weren't really involved. He left Salak. It was just, there was so much wealth disparity. We were there. We were in Sao Paulo. A lot of us got our phones stolen. It's really bad. I mean, the poverty, I think it's going to improve, but that's going to take some time. And I think this is why Lula has really just dived into the whole BRICS thing, because I think that's going to help Brazil get back to where it was as a major player. It's a huge economy in Latin America. It's the largest. And this is why Argentina is so important as well, because it's the second one after Brazil. And so on day 3, right? On day 3 that we're talking about, all of these countries, Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE have been approved to join BRICS. And would I move to Egypt? Would I move to Saudi Arabia or the UAE? No. Just because they're, going to be BRICS countries doesn't mean I want to go live there. But I think there's a little bit more that you need to look into depending on what. But I will say I would rather not live in a NATO country, because NATO to me is a terrorist alliance, and I just don't want to be a part of that. And to me, it's more of living in a non-NATO country than living in a BRICS country necessarily. And I think it depends on what you like and your needs and stuff. So
don't you understand that NATO is a Captain America in the form of a group of countries that are going to spread democracy and freedom all over the place, and they, that's what they're all about. Freedom, fam.
Anyway, so let me go to the third section because we have a guest, right? Yeah. Okay, so day 3, and I will let Cheese Slice bring that up first. Day 3 was today, and that was pretty much marked by just the approval, right, of these member states in there. That's not day 3. Go to day 3. And it was marked by the approval of the member states and the ones I just mentioned. And let's see if I can pull it up here since I'm not seeing it on the screen. Yeah, so what I said, all these countries that was marked, they approved the UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Argentina. And a lot of people were saying Argentina was going to opt out. Well, they didn't. Yeah. And they were approved. Now, I did a whole thing because I was covering this in the morning when this was going on. So there was a couple of things said. There was 2 key things. One was they approved the Johannesburg II Declaration, and I'll tell you exactly what that is in a minute. And the second one was that they told us that these countries were officially accepted. And they basically talked about how the adoption of these new members shows that other blocs need reform because more people are wanting to join BRICS. There are more people that are wanting to join BRICS than is allowed right now. They have to go through a whole process in order to join. There was also assurances made by the new development BRICS Bank, headed by Dilma Rousseff, that is, it's going to support and provide economic backing, banking, and infrastructure to these BRICS countries. BRICS is seen as an alliance for economic growth and beneficial, sustainable development through multilateral systems. What that means is things are going to be more fair than in other alliances where there's like a dominating head. They want to stress a commitment to peaceful resolutions, and they reaffirm a mutual understanding among their partners. And they know there's different viewpoints, but they want to respect each other's viewpoints. So that's kind of answering your question in the beginning. Like, yeah, there's definitely disagreements there, but that's part of the whole thing. So the countries, the 6 countries that were added are going to be official starting January 1st of 2024. So that's when they officially will be added. Now, there was a whole session that lasted a few hours where Cyril Ramaphosa made several comments. And one of the things he said was that BRICS seeks to erase the barriers of North, South, East, and West. And real quick, since you have it up, these are the countries, right, that were added. And after the additions, the BRICS GDP will have 37% of the global GDP share. The population of BRICS countries will be 46% of the world's population, and BRICS will hold 44.35% of the world's oil reserves. This should scare the living crap, and it clearly does, out of the West, because they've been saying it failed. They've been saying it's bad. They've been saying China took over BRICS and that everybody's been trying to appease China. Macron begged for an invite, and he got rejected, by the way. So that was pretty funny. But yeah, so Cyril Ramaphosa spoke. Lula spoke. Lula said that the attempts to place the blame of pollution on developing and poor countries is not fair. This is something that was really surprisingly nice from Lula. I didn't really expect him to go hard on this. He is going after the companies that are using this green agenda to make these poor countries pay, not just African countries, but Brazil itself, because they're trying to basically put in their corporations in Brazil and in all over, of course, the global South. And he's saying that he's against that. And he's saying they're trying to make these poor countries have these restrictions, but they're the ones profiting, and they're the ones that are the biggest polluters. When we're talking about the United States, we're talking about Europe. And so all the people that pay the price on this, of course, are in the global South. So he was talking about that. And he said that energy transition can't be something that's going to allow the legacy of exploitation. Now, Putin also spoke, and he said something very powerful, fam. And I'm just going to read what he said because I thought it was really, really powerful. And I made a specific tweet about it. and I'll
Okay.
just go ahead and read it. He said, there are countries doing everything to preserve this unipolar world order because they benefit from it, calling it a so-called rules-based order, with rules no one has seen, using principles for selfish goals and changing them to favor the current political need. These are
Yeah.
modern-day colonizers hiding behind the mask of so-called democracy while exploiting other countries. And I got this from the translator that was happening live. There's different translations. This is why I didn't put quotes around everything he said, but that he is basically calling out the West here, and these are again some of the things Putin says that really resonate with a lot of the people. And yeah, so day 3, just the big announcement was these 6 countries are coming in. Modi spoke, Xi Jinping spoke, Miguel Diaz-Canel spoke. You had several other members. Antonio Guterres spoke. Antonio Guterres said multipolarity isn't enough to ensure a peaceful world. Does it bother you, fam, that they included Antonio Guterres?
No. No.
No?
Doesn't bother me. No.
It doesn't bother me, but it bothers a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because he is the UN, the head of the UN, and to a lot of people, it's like, well, that means that this whole thing is compromised, right? Because he's there. But the thing is, again, like I said, the bloc is always diplomatic. They're always going to mimic the UN, and he obviously doesn't have a lot of fans either there, and he's probably the most milquetoast out of all of them, because a lot of Russia has opposed what he said in general when he talks about ignores the crimes being committed by Ukraine and Donbass. And I think it was smart of them to invite him, so they wouldn't say that, these guys are not keeping the UN in there, blah 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 blah. So I think that was smart of them to do
no,
this.
you know how I feel about certain leaders who are able to work both sides and incorporate people. I mean, I love the way Lula has been amazing at that, where he's been able to keep both sides at bay. He understands. He's a very crafty politician. Narendra Modi, another one who understands. I mean, like Narendra Modi was at BRICS one time, and he was there, and they were striking some deals. And the very next day, he was at the G17 or whatever, and Biden almost tripped over himself having to go speak to Modi. And it was almost like somebody within the cabinet said, "Go speak to Modi. Make sure you make amends with him." And Modi's like, "Oh God," and when by inviting people here, you really disarm them. You know what I'm saying? From saying this is a polarizing thing that they're trying to do. You really disarm the whole, pushback against it. And I also want to just say real quickly, because as I was thinking, as we were talking about, what Lula is doing is also very important too, as well, because I think there's this talk, especially in the United States now, with Hawaii going on, right? And the possible hurricane that was coming up to California and Vegas, and that whole situation where people are pushing climate change, but they're pushing this mentality of, us reducing our carbon footprint, the individuals, without even looking at the major causes of what's going on when it comes to energy. For me, I don't think of energy as just us burning fossil fuels into the air just to make things dirty for our own selfish needs. I also think about grandma and grandpa in a third world country staying warm, keeping warm, energy of lights of students in Africa that need that, electricity and whatnot. So the way we look at climate change, global change, and the use of energy and fossil fuels or whatnot is very important. I think Lula has really hit it on the nose here as well by saying, listen, these guys are going to come in acting like they're being all about Mother Earth, planet Earth, being all green. But really, it's all about, them once again controlling the power and the mechanism. Not to mention the fact that who is the United States to tell people in the other countries not to industrialize right now when they've done it themselves? It's just that it's really one-sided. And the way they've been able to propaganda this narrative to the United States people, where a lot of people are screaming, climate change, we got to stop this, we got to do this, and looking at the individual, it really is kind of crazy. So I'm glad that he did speak like this.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that the overall sentiment of BRICS really was multipolarity. We're going to work together. This isn't going to be an alliance where we tell each other what to do. This is going to be, we respect, your ideologies and what you believe in. And we're just going to try to work in areas where we can work together, where we can get mutually beneficial outcomes. And that's that. We all have different viewpoints. There were 65, I think, members speaking today, or members there. Not all of them spoke. But I mean, 65 of them is like a lot, right? And so it's like, how are you going to get all these people to agree or not, right? So
Never.
there's definitely disagreements. Later on, Sergei Lavrov said, this conflict won't be resolved in a resolution, or it's going to be resolved on the battlefield, because Ukraine and NATO don't want a peaceful resolution. So Lavrov said, no, sorry, this isn't going to happen that way when he had his presser, because he's telling the truth. Because Ukraine, as much as all these, China and Brazil and all these people want everything to be resolved by a peaceful resolution, it's not going to happen with NATO. I just don't see it happening that way, because they want Russia to fall apart. They want to break Russia up. There's just no peaceful resolution or dialogue with them that's actually possible until they decide that they are actually serious about that. And so they're clearly not. They've been attacking Donetsk for the last few days, time and time again, and there's really nothing left for them to attack. But that's what's been happening. And so I do think the overall sentiment of BRICS is, how do we regain national sovereignty in our countries? How do we grow the global South? How do we grow these countries that have never really had a seat at the table? And how do we work together with giant up and coming economies, and also with economies that are well developed now, like China? And China really said, I'm a friend of Africa. They said, in spite of, a lot of the things that people say that they're doing in Africa, they said, we are willing to work with Africa. They talked about the railroads they're building, the roads they're building. One of our friends actually mentioned, right, that the roads that were being built in certain countries in Africa. And so definitely that remains to be seen, that relationship. And there's definitely tension between China and India still, right? It's not like China and India are best friends. But again, in spite of all of that, there's an attempt to at least have conversations and sit around and discuss things. And I admire that, because that's the kind of mindset I have, I think, for a lot of things as well. So I really, I think it went well. I think it highlighted how strongly these countries are coming out. In a way, it is anti-Western, but in a way, it's more of like anti-dominance and more towards like a different point of view. And I think, I think that it really is scaring the West. And I think they're just trying to pretend it's not. But I think it is really showing where the world is going. And we'll see what happens with Dilma Rousseff and the new development bank, and how that's going to play out with this currency. The currency thing isn't happening yet, but in the future, it's something they're looking to do. So I think where they can advance quickly is the transportation sectors, because that would be a quick way of getting people together. So